today is going to work. We have a great panel. We are going to be playing hot potato. So we have Tim Keene from the City of Atlanta. We have Stephanie Stuckey, Ted Miltiades, and Lynn Minnie from the City of Decatur. Ted Miltiades is from the Department of Community Affairs, and Stephanie Stuckey is the Office of Resilience from the City of Atlanta. They're going to be talking about who they are, what they do, and why this movement applies to them, and why are they here. And then we're going to open it up, we're going to have a little bit more of a Q&A and a conversation just about their reaction of what's been going on for the past year and a half in Atlanta and the surrounding areas, the metropolitan area, because a lot of people are saying, wow, this is very interesting, but how do we do this? What conversations do we need to be having, or what type of variances or what type of zoning and codes do we need to work with to change to allow for? So we are going to start with Ted Miltiades from the Department of Community Affairs, and I'll let him introduce himself, as well Bill Townsend.
Thank you, Will. It's good to be here again. Last year it was like 500 people here. This time I think it's about 50 or 60. So I'm the director of the State of Georgia's Construction Codes Program. Bill Townsend is our lead code consultant. I brought him with me because he knows all the technical stuff, and if I get stuck, it's always good to have somebody here to help me.
More close.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Very close. All right, so we have a, Bill, are you going to work this, or Will?
Oh, sorry. I got technical difficulties.
We have a few slides we're going to go through and talk about. All right, we are the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. We're one of the state agencies that is under Governor Deal, and our commissioner is Christopher Nunn. All right, so what do we do? As the director of the state's construction codes program, we update and keep current all the state's construction codes. They're non-mandatory construction codes in Georgia. Building code, gas code, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, fire, energy, residential, and we just added a 9th mandatory code for Georgia, and that is the swimming pool and spa code. 4 of those codes apply to single-family houses, whether they are a stick-built single-family house, or it's a modular, or it's a tiny house. And that is the residential code, the energy code, the plumbing code, and the electrical code. So the same code requirements that are for a stick-built house or a modular-built structure also apply to a tiny house. Tiny house movement. Regulations, projects, and industrialized buildings, tiny homes. We think of this as just another option in housing. Some people, want a big house. Some people want a stick-built. Some people want a modular. Tiny house is just a good option and another alternative for people in housing. And we think affordable. All right, what is a dwelling unit? A dwelling unit is a single unit providing complete independent living facilities for one or more persons for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. It's a habitable space and includes also the bathrooms, toilets, closets, halls, storage, utility spaces. And we toured yesterday. You can see that these tiny houses have all of those things too. They're just a little bit smaller. Okay. The ones we're talking about are the ones that are on permanent foundation. I know a lot of them outside are on wheels, but what our codes, the construction codes that I just mentioned to you, will apply to, and those 4 in particular, will be the ones here on a permanent foundation. The ones on wheels are different under our program at the Department of Community Affairs. So what have we done since last year? Since we've been here last year, we've had some local jurisdictions submit a local code amendment to go ahead and move forward with some of the changes. The second big thing that we've done is effective January 1, 2018, we have one more meeting to get through. That's the State Codes Advisory Committee, where we've changed the square footage of a room from 120 to 70. So that will be applicable statewide. Anybody that builds a single-family house, a tiny house, a modular home, you can build that room, you can go down to 70 from 120. So that's a big change in space, and that's available, that will be applicable statewide. But the other thing, and Will mentioned it, and Kim did earlier, is this appendix, which has to be adopted locally. Effective January 1, that will be available for all those 159 counties, all the cities in Georgia, to adopt that appendix to address all those other areas, means of egress, the landing, the treads and risers, the stairs, that loft area. So that's a big thing that's been done. We brought that forward to make it easier for folks to implement tiny houses. Zoning is still going to be a local issue and has to be taken care of at the city and county level. But having that appendix available and a consistency for safety is very important. The effective date is January 1. This link, and everything is on our webpage. You can see the appendix and all the code amendments that are going to be available for adoption. You have to hold it really close. Okay, these are some of the challenges that we faced and the tiny house movement, and these code amendments and appendix now help to address. Room size, 120 to 70, ceiling height, hallway minimum width, that loft, the stairs up to that loft, sanitation, energy code still applies, and means of egress. You got to be able to get out of there if there's an emergency or there's a fire. This is some pictures of the loft. This is a tiny house fact sheet that we are preparing at the Department of Community Affairs. We're just about done, and as soon as the board votes to make this appendix available as an option, we'll post that on our website. That will help you distinguish between the one permanent foundation, the one on wheels, and then some things are categorized as a recreational vehicle. But that'll be a one-page fact sheet that should give you all the information about tiny houses. So, these are a list of some of the projects that we're aware of that are around. East Point, Echo Cottage. These are things that are in the works, some are being built. Bill and I actually went to Savannah and met with those folks. The Housing Authority is doing this for homeless veterans. So we think that's very admirable that they're building this tiny house village down there in Savannah. Here's another one indicator that was mentioned earlier. City of Clarkston, I know they're very innovative. That gentleman is the mayor. He's very active, and he's moving forward with something in the city of Clarkston. Okay, the other thing that I manage is the state's industrialized buildings program. Those are modular built structures for residential and commercial in factories. We're trying to tie those factories that build those single-family modular structures now to mass produce tiny houses. That would be even more affordable. It's built in an enclosed environment, away from the elements. So if we can tie some of those manufacturers to do tiny houses, I think it would also increase affordability. This is just some of the dimensions and the things that you look at with the International Residential Code. That's what IRC stands for. So we're trying to tie to the Industrialized Buildings Program. Here's an example of one, a cabin, tiny home that can be built in a factory and then shipped out to the site. This is the first manufacturer that we have that is going to join the program at the state, the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, to build, mass-produce tiny homes. So we just giving him a little shout out there. All right, so I think we're going to take the questions at the end.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
And now, Tim King.
I saw. We're good.
Hey everybody, I'm Tim Keene with the City of Atlanta. And I'm going to mention a few things before I get into tiny house. One is that in 1970, the City of Atlanta had 496,000 residents. At that time, the region was 1.8 million people. So the city was almost 30% of the region. Today, the city has less people, 475,000 in a region of 6 million. So this is a place where the region has grown dramatically over the last generation of growth, and the city really hasn't. The city's been very static. That's changing, however, as you know. Between 2010 and 2016, the city's population rose by 50,000 people, which may not sound like a lot, but that's a town the size of Smyrna or Dunwoody coming into the city over just a 6-year period. And that is a change, that's a big change. That shift, again, we haven't had growth like that in a long time. As a matter of fact, last year the city issued more new construction residential permits than each of the fastest growing suburban counties in the region, more than Cobb or Forsyth or Gwinnett. Again, hasn't happened in a generation. we recognize there's a shift happening in where people want to live. So we asked someone to help us think about what Atlanta's goal should be for population during the next generation of growth. And in the next generation of growth, the ARC, the Regional Commission, says we'll add 2.5 million people to our region in the next generation of growth. They're saying 25 years. That's the equivalent of adding Charlotte, actually a little more than Charlotte, and its region to ours over that period. So it's a big, big change that we're going to see. And the help that we got convinced us that the city's goal should be to, that 25% of that new growth come to the city. If that was the case, that would mean the city's population would be 1.2 million people. Again, it's 475,000 today. Big change. So we recently completed something called Atlanta City Design, which essentially is a design for that city of 1.2 million people with double the employment. And it's a very important step for us to try to control the conversation about the city's growth and development so that it will be successful and we can be intentional about how that growth occurs such that that city of 1.2 million is a much better place to live in and do business than the city that we have today. So I'm saying all that to say that the problem right now, not just in Atlanta, but a lot of places, is that most of what gets built is essentially for one lifestyle. You know, no matter, we have a very few number of building types that get built in the city today. It's a very narrow range of building types that we build for residential, where through history we've built a lot of different kinds of buildings in the city. In our old neighborhoods, we had a great variety of buildings, small and big, all kinds of apartment buildings with different numbers of units. And, you know, there's a great diversity of types within these old neighborhoods, and zoning really locked that down. You know, we decided to really permit through zoning only a very narrow band of housing, and really for just kind of one expectation in terms of lifestyle. So you go to the next one. So this is a really big issue for the city because we want that city of 1.2 million people, of course, to be for everyone, every income range, every generation, all races. You know, that's Atlanta's thing. Is we want this to be a very diverse city. So we're not going to get there if we continue to legally require such a narrow band of lifestyle in the city. And zoning is a big issue here. You know, and zoning is really just, of course, a reflection of what people in the city want. You know, we say it's zoning. We can figure out the zoning. You know, there's plenty of ways to write ordinances that can enable whatever we want. The bigger issue is the community issue. What will people allow? You know, which is the biggest challenge for any community that's interested in enabling anything, including tiny houses. You can go to the next slide. So in our case, what we did was we wanted to take a thoughtful look at this and engage the group, including Will and others. We ended up, you can go to the next slide, I'm not remembering all this. We got Southface actually to lead a process for us with the community to look at a whole range of housing types, but including very small residences. And they came up with a strategy as to all the things that we would need to do to enable a much larger range of housing types, sizes in our city. You can go to the next slide. The first thing that they actually got approved was accessory dwelling units. You know, that you can have a second unit on your lot. We wanted to do it in more than just the R5 districts of the city, but it came to, again, this is what the community would permit, is that we start with the R5 districts in the city where we allow this second unit, a small unit on a lot, which was previously not permitted. Southface's strategy includes permitting this and all the details around what it would require to permit this in all of our residential zones, but we started with the R5 district. You can go to the next slide. And you can see in the red color here where those R5 districts are in the city of Atlanta. Go to the next. Okay. So so we have this kind of broad strategy around all these housing types. We started with the ADUs. It's a modest start, but again, it's what the community would prepare for. I'll tell you that the city design work that we've done is really our means of focusing people on the challenges that we have as a city. If we're to grow in a way that does include everyone, we're going to have to confront some issues that really we haven't in quite a while. The zoning in Atlanta really dates, the current district ordinance dates to the 1980s. Really a lot of it dates to the 1960s, but the current ordinance was written in the 1980s. And so there's going to be an ongoing discussion with residents of Atlanta around how else we will permit this type of housing to be built in the city. We actually have a design competition going on right now. I want to mention to everyone, this is for low-income housing and has applicability here. In furtherance of this idea that we want that city of 1.2 million people to be for everyone, we recognize that for low-income people in particular, it's going to be critical that we come up with new ways to design and finance smaller units for low-income people. And so this design competition is about that. We're focusing on a place called Santa Fe Apartments, which is an old motel on Metropolitan Parkway, which is for people that would otherwise be homeless. It's called supportive housing. So these are very small units that share a kitchen on this property. Since it's an old motel, there's a lot of surface parking, but no one owns cars. So the design competition is around how we can add to this number of supportive housing units. There's about 175 or so on the site now. We want to see how many more we can achieve by infilling on these surface parking lots. It's got to be beautiful, of course. And then we've got a site next door where we'll add some units as well. So if you go to the city planning website, it's going to be a really interesting process because we're engaging the private sector, architects, and developers to say, what's it going to be like to live in Atlanta as a low-income person in the future? How can we build beautiful housing, but at a much larger scale? So it's going to be smaller units. We're excited about that. So that's really the end of my presentation. Will, we want to...
Thank you, Tim. And so, yeah, go ahead. Round of applause, Tim. So, unfortunately, I received a text message that unfortunately there was a little issue, and Stephanie will not be joining us. So, if you, all right, oh, do you want? We can. So, Stephanie Stuckey has been a huge supporter of us. She actually put forth, she's the reason why Tiny House Atlanta and the Microliving Institute has a tiny house office. So please go tour the office with the Tesla Powerwall, say hello to Hannah Solar, and that office, I find it's fascinating because, again, I always keep saying this, we need to think beyond the walls of the tiny homes. I know everyone wants a tiny house, they're cool, we see them on TV, but it's the idea of, like Tim said, how else can we use these spaces? And being able to use this office to create conversation and create more engaging ways to utilize space within cities. Even think of disaster relief, everything that's happened with hurricanes Harvey and Irma. I mean, I would rather be relieved from a disaster situation in a tiny house than a FEMA trailer. No offense to FEMA, but I would love to have a beautiful home on wheels comfort me during a hard time. So it's those type of things. How else can we use this movement to help our community and help our society grow? So that's what the Resilient Atlanta does. They're thinking through that plan of how to help Atlantans in our area have plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G with whatever. And so they got a Rockefeller grant, and we're, is it 100 cities of the United States? And so Atlanta is one of those 100 cities, and this affects all of us. I mean, it's the metropolitan area. And so, you know, it's that whole what if, how can we, how do we respond? How do we make our city more resilient? So with that was Stephanie. I'm gonna throw it over to Lynn Minnie at the City of Decatur.
First time. So you've been here one person? That's awesome. Well, welcome. Welcome. I'm Lynn Minnie. I'm the Assistant City Manager for the City of Decatur. I'm in charge of Community and Economic Development, and I've been with the city for 34 years. I was 12 years old when I came to work here. I'm a planning prodigy. What I have for you, and after Tim spoke, I want to say that basically we have the big city, and now we're talking about a tiny city. And I have a tiny PowerPoint, so everything is within the theme. For those of you who don't know, the city of Decatur is only 4.2 square miles. Very small city. There's a large area of DeKalb County that actually has a Decatur mailing address, but the city is relatively small. We reached our largest population in 1960. We had 22,000 people who lived in the city of Decatur. And if you think about it, we have a lot more houses than we did then. We just had larger families. We had people with 3 and 4 children who somehow managed to live in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. And since that time, as white flight took place, a lot of people leaving the city, our population really continued to go down until, I think it was about the 2000 census, when we hit our lowest point of 17,800 people. We are now back up to 22,000 people. So people who think that Decatur's development, and we've just blossomed and we're huge and we have all these people, we are just back to where we were in 1960. So we were asked to talk about why this project, why tiny house living is important to us in the city of Decatur. And it's because what we're seeing is a lot of those older homes, those starter houses, those places for families, those 3-bedroom, 1-bath houses are being knocked down and they're being replaced by huge homes. And as we talked about kind of that homogeneous look of the suburbs, it's like the suburbs are moving back into the city and they're bringing lots of things that we don't want with them. So we're really struggling with how do we maintain housing diversity. And to us, tiny houses are one tool in the toolbox. We want to make sure that we continue to be a real city. And a real city is a place where lots of people of all walks of life, regardless of their age, regardless of their income, can live within relative proximity of each other. That's the way the city has always been. In the city of Decatur, we have a philosophy that we call the yes-if philosophy. A lot of governments, and we try not to be like a lot of governments, but a lot of governments, whenever there's a great idea, the answer that you get is no. No, you can't do this because A, B, and C. In the city of Decatur, we try to step back and say, yes, if, what are the conditions under which we could let that happen? And one of the things that we've done, and that I'll be happy to talk about later to any of you, is our Cottage Court pilot project. Ted alluded to it. We have been talking about affordable housing for way more years than we like to admit. And we decided 2 years ago it was time to quit talking about it. We've defined what it is. We know what the gaps are in our housing. But we decided we needed to put our money where our mouth was and do a pilot project. Because what we're finding is that we've tried to talk to builders, we changed our zoning. We updated our zoning 2 years ago. We got rid of minimum house sizes that were enacted in the 1980s. That's gone. You can build a small house in the city. We tried to make it easier to build accessory dwelling units behind homes, but we weren't seeing the builders step up and take that as an opportunity. They would take up a relatively large single-family lot, they'd knock down the house, they'd put a very large house back. And we were hoping that we could get them to build 3 or 4 small houses on that same lot. So a piece of property came available in the city 2 years ago adjacent to downtown. It's a perfect location on Commerce Drive. It's between single family and commercial, so it's a good transition point. It was a half acre of land. The Decatur Downtown Development Authority went to the city commission and asked for some funding. It was $180,000, which, you know, Decatur real estate was really pretty cheap. And they gave us the funding, which allowed us to buy that lot. We then hired Bruce Toller, who is an architect out of Mississippi, who really was the one who helped develop those Katrina cottages, the small, tiny homes. He designed some homes for us. And our goal is to show the private sector that you could do this on a half-acre lot. We didn't want any variances. We wanted to follow all of our rules, and that's what we've done. We tried to provide a variety of houses. We're building 6 homes. One of them is 1,100 square feet. One of them is a little under 500 square feet. And the ones in between average around 900 square feet. One of them is being built to be totally accessible. We are going to hold the land in a land trust, and we're going to sell the houses with a 99-year lease. And that way we can control affordability forever. We will control how they're resold. And we're also going to be able to make them affordable because you won't be taxed on the value of the land. You're only taxed on the value of the home. So, to say why is this important to me before we open it to questions, as I said, I've done this for 30, 40 years. City of Decatur is very important to me. I believe in community. I believe that what we do is create community. I'm at the tail end of my career. I'm getting ready to step away. And I don't want my legacy to be the person who ruined this amazing city. So I want to spend the next couple of years figuring out affordable housing, how we can make that happen here in the city. We just bought 77 acres of land from the United Methodist Children's Home. And again, when you're 4.2 square miles and you're pretty much built out, 77 acres is phenomenal. There are 34 historic buildings there. We will be kicking off a public input process in January, but the opportunities are amazing to provide affordable housing for seniors, affordable housing for new residents, affordable housing for adults with disabilities, affordable housing and studio space for artists who can come onto this beautiful site, and we can preserve the legacy of the Methodist Children's Home and address some of these problems as well. So welcome to Decatur. I hope you enjoy your stay here, and if I can answer any questions, I'm happy to do so. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask our panel actually to come back up. So Lynn, don't go anywhere. So let's grab a chair and let's bring it a little forward. And again, this is hot potato. We only have one mic. I did turn it up a little, so hopefully it's a little bit better. So I have some questions, and I'm requiring that you please do stand up when you have the mic in your hands. So one up, one down, you know. So I guess, you know, let's start off, I want to know personally, you know, I want to know personally from each of you what you think of this movement. And I know you've kind of explained it to us, you've explained to us of why you're involved in it on the work side, but I just want to know personally, what do you think of the tiny house movement?
Okay. I guess I'm sorry, excuse me. I guess I would say I'm sorry it's a movement. That might be, you know, in the sense that it's funny how people talk about these things in public meetings as though it's some kind of foreign thing, or, you know, we're doing something that's, you know, scary or something. I don't know what it is, but it just, so I personally have I won't call it tiny, I have a small place. And so I think it's, I always thought that when we went through the Great Recession, everyone would go in this direction. Like this was this cataclysmic shift that would happen in this country, and we would build the next America around much more modest living, you know, and it felt like it was kind of going in that direction, but I think the success of this is just fundamentally important to how places need to be growing. So I feel like why I started with, I wish it wasn't a movement, I just think it's more than a movement, it's really just about how we should be building places.
I agree with you. One of the things that I always like to remind people is that, first of all, I am a baby boomer, and we are not going quietly into the great night. We are going to be driving that housing market for several more decades, I hope. And one of the things that was interesting to me when we did the cottage court, it was a big neighborhood involvement, was how many empty nesters, single women particularly, who lived in the city of Decatur and wanted to downsize, ready to cash in their equity on their house, but they didn't want to live in a condo. I don't want to live in a condo. We downsized also into a little house. I want a yard. I mean, they wanted community. They would have bought, we could have sold these 6 houses probably 10 times over to people who really we weren't targeting. Our project is going to be targeted at people who work for the City of Decatur and city school system, but there's a market out there from people who are looking to downsize, and to me it's just another tool in the toolbox. The other thing we look at is the fact that if we allow and encourage tiny houses as accessory dwelling units, you are providing possibly an affordable rental opportunity for someone in a traditional single-family neighborhood, but you're also providing rental income to a homeowner who might be unable to afford that house except for the fact that they have a rental unit behind it.
I think it primarily deals with individualism and choice. I think it's another option for housing, and it's affordable, and that's the key that people want. If you want to choose a tiny house, if you want a bigger house, you want a modular house or a stick-built, that's what it's about, and I think that's what America's about. People deciding for themselves what they want to live and what they want to live in. So this gives people another option, and especially now with people becoming minimalist and you can do everything on that iPad, from watch television to your computer, so you don't need a lot of space, and it gives you freedom perhaps to have more income to do other things and to actually live beyond that space. So I think that's the most important thing. And Bill didn't say anything earlier, but he's our lead technical consultant, so he has a lot to say too.
I won't take much of your time, but what we saw was, tiny houses were born out of the need. There were a lot of zoning issues when they first were approached by people who wanted to get the tiny house approval. Tiny houses really don't comply with the code if they're on wheels. So we have building officials and local governments calling us, well, people want to put tiny houses in our jurisdiction, how do we approve them? So the Department of Community Affairs has worked hard to try to come up with some resolutions for that. We changed the code, which if you weren't here earlier, Ted spoke a little bit about that. And now we're working with our industrialized buildings, modular prefab buildings industry to try to bring those manufacturers on board and offer some factory-built buildings for people to purchase. And the advantage of factory-built buildings is that they're approved through our program in a strict quality control program for how they build in their plant. And their plans are code-compliant plans, and they're third-party inspected in the plant. And then they have a label that's put on them that says they comply with the codes. So that's the biggest advantage for coming through factory-built buildings, and they're built on permanent foundations. So that's a little bit of the history of how we went from zoning to codes and where we are now, working with local governments to change their ordinances.
So, we will be fielding questions for the panel too, but I just want to kind of ask this. What advice or what would you say to this group to, aid them on their journey? Meaning like, what do they need to know to help you understand what they're looking for? Does that question make sense? So the whole idea, like, we're here, we're wanting to know, like, how can we get into a tiny house? I know there's obstacles. I guess let's talk about the obstacles, or let's not call them obstacles, let's call them opportunities to discuss. What opportunities can we discuss that needs to be, besides, I know the big focus is zoning and codes, but let's just talk about that. I'll just throw it to you. And it doesn't have to go down the row, whoever wants to go first. There are obstacles though.
Okay, so the state, January 1, 2018, has a tiny house appendix that is available to be adopted throughout the state, your local government, city and county. But somebody else has to do that work. Somebody's got to go to Decatur and Atlanta and Clarkston and Savannah and all these other areas, Athens and Valdosta, and say, we want this tiny house appendix. So you got to get with the planning or building official for that city or county and say the state has adopted it, it's a safety measure, we can make tiny houses. So you have to get involved at your city and county now to get that tiny house appendix. Now the one thing that I talked about earlier that is statewide is that room change from 120 to 70. So that's applicable statewide and can be utilized effective January 1. But to go with that, you're going to need that appendix. So that's what I think the obstacle or the where you'll need to be active if you want tiny houses in your community.
Does anyone have a question I could throw at the panel? Yes.
The average tiny house out there costs approximately 227 square foot or 250 for less than, let's say, 330 square foot. To me, that is a huge amount of money for a big house. It costs $150 a square foot. So my question, when you talk about affordable housing, how do you bring in the builders to be more economical for people that really can't afford $227 a square foot? I mean, that's a huge amount of money compared to you can buy a house at $150 and have it built for a square foot. And like I'm thinking of senior citizens, for example, that like to live at home and have their independence. As long as you can keep them independent, but you also can't rob them blind of all their estates. How does that balance all of your obstacles?
So the question was, because the price per square foot is higher for a smaller space. So do know that there like Big Heart tiny homes, they start at $25,000. So that's a much different price per square foot than, let's say, the Hummingbird tiny house, which is, I believe, $102,000 for their fifth wheel. So yes, and it is by choice and customization. You know, again, you know, the idea of thinking through what you want, but also I know people need to make money. And obviously the quality of, meaning like putting in granite countertops and other things like that can shoot through the roof. Carl, you're talking to me.
Well, I have a response. I think that has to be more per square foot. With between more walls and roof than there is air. Bigger houses are much cheaper per square foot because you're building a lot.
Hold on, I'm gonna get you the microphone. This is Carl, he's talking it too, so feel free to come back and hear Carl.
Small houses have to be more per square foot. There's no way around it. It's a physical limit. You're building much more square footage of walls, roof, and floors versus the air. You build a big house, it's a lot of air. So there's no way around it. But the house is still a lot less expensive because it's significantly less square footage. That's not a matter of any builders ripping anybody off. You just cannot build a little house for the same price you can build a big house. You have base costs, it's on the ground, you got sewer, you got water, you got electrical connections. That's the same cost for a big house versus a little house.
So true, you know, when you build small, you still have to make sure you have a bathroom and kitchen. And those are the most expensive rooms in the house. And yet, just like as Carl said, if you're building just a den or a living room, you're just building walls. So that's much more air. Panel, I'm gonna throw it to you. Anyone want to respond?
Say that, and also land costs too, particularly in a place like Decatur. With the pilot project that we're doing, we are acting as developer. So we're bringing in a builder to build a project, but we are permitting it. We're getting all of the things out of the way that need to be done that take their time. We also are not planning on making a profit. So that's the way that we're going to be able to bring them in relatively inexpensively. And we're looking at other lands that the city owns. There are a few that we have gotten through tax sales or other opportunities. Usually we make these, just hold them as green space, but if they are buildable lots, we're going to look at an opportunity to do this again so that we're building tiny houses that we can keep affordable.
Another question? Yes, sir.
This question is for Tim. I'm actually particularly excited about the Santa Fe Motel. For those who don't know, it's on what was Highway 41 from Chicago to Florida before 85 came through and kind of wiped out a lot of neighborhoods. And that corridor became old derelict motels because everybody was flying through on 85. So that's the historic significance of how it became so derelict. It's a classic old motel, you know, from back in the day. And I have a friend who lives close to there, so I'm excited for several reasons. In that model, and it's really close to a large and growing university, you know, just a few miles from it, maybe not even that far. It's on a main corridor, on a main MARTA line, right into the heart of the city. So it's usable and affordable in a dramatic way. So I think it's a phenomenal location. If I wanted to, say, get a group of people and utilize the new equity crowdfunding and buy a derelict or underutilized commercial property with the same intent and a for-profit model, you know, to look at something kind of new urbanist mixed use in the long run, are the codes and the planning that is happening with, you know, implementing the Santa Fe Motel, how will I be able to look at that in that model?
That's a great question. The city zoning is a tangled mess, which is incredibly confusing and locks the city down in so many ways. So we have many changes to make from a zoning perspective. And among the reasons that we wanted to do this housing design competition, I told you we were trying to find new ways to build low-income housing on a much bigger scale. But we recognize that we're going to have to create zoning that will make that easy to do. So this design competition is started. It will conclude no later than the beginning of next year. So this is not something that's going to happen years from now. And among the things that the city will be doing in conjunction with evaluating the submittals that we get is we're going to have the responsibility of evaluating our zoning so that we can create, it could be an overlay zoning, you know, that we apply to different properties where this opportunity exists, or it could be more of a by right base zoning that we create. But we're going to use Santa Fe as a model for this. So the regulatory framework around enabling this on a much larger scale will be one of the products of the Santa Fe competition. And among the other reasons for choosing Santa Fe is that in our city design, Metropolitan is one of those growth corridors where we're suggesting that the city's broken down into growth corridors, which includes the core of the city and these corridors that come out from it, and then conservation areas, which are the neighborhoods. Not that they won't change, the neighborhoods, the conservation areas, but that's a different scale of growth. And so getting in front of Metropolitan is an interesting street because, you know, there's a lot of these old commercial properties, as you know, along Metropolitan, but we're before the hyper escalation of value there. So you've got some opportunities still that exist, but if we wait much longer, we won't have it.
Okay, one more thing. There's a new leak precinct right across the street, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for Ken too. I'm stretching my memory back like half an hour, so forgive me. You were talking about zoning and versus and maybe in conjunction with what the community would allow, and I thought that was very interesting. We'll hear more about that. But you said specifically R5 zones. I think I'm using the right words. You said Atlanta is starting to open up R5 zones for tiny home use. And then you showed a map, and there weren't very many R5 zones there. I saw on the slide that was just before that, it said single-family residential. But that can't be all the single-family residential zones. What's different about R5 zone from other single-family residential that qualifies these for tiny home use?
That's right. When South Place finished their work with us, they were recommending that we adopt ADUs. We have 5 single-family residential zones. They were suggesting that the ADU should be permitted in all 5 of those. So if I gave you a map of all the residential districts in the city that are single-family, it would cover, 60% of the city. So what you saw there was only the R5, and the reason that R5 was chosen as the first round is because it's the densest of the single-family residential zones, and that was the district that the community, through the community infrastructure that exists, said we'll support it there first, and no further than that. And so that's why I started with, we have the technical means to make this stuff happen. That's not the problem. The problem is what will people, let happen,
So the population density is already very high in those zones.
It's higher, it's not very high, it's still single family, so it's not like an apartment type zoning, but it's the higher of the residential, the single family.
Yes.
You guys talk about the tiny homes being built in an, wording, basically indoor. Are we considering that legally modular homes, or are those going to be considered modular homes, specifically in a place like Atlanta?
A modular home is really no different than a stick-built home. The law was changed many years ago. If you want to build a stick-built home here and you want a modular home that's built in a factory, they're both built to the same codes, they cannot be zoned out. That law was changed several years ago.
Someone have a question?
So I haven't really seen much about like zoning for tiny homes on wheels. Well, the most recent thing I saw was basically like you can't do that. So is that still the case? And if it is, how soon will like it be a thing? And also, what's your website for the tiny house fact sheets? Yes.
You just Google Georgia Department of Community Affairs, and then you go into the Construction Codes tab, and then you'll find everything I talked about, the tiny house appendix, fact sheet will go up there a little bit later. Now, we do not cover the ones on wheels. Those are somewhere else. They're really not, the State Fire Marshal covers mobile homes, manufactured housing, so those are different. Those are actually built to a different code. It's called the HUD code. So the tiny houses are going to be built to the same construction code as a stick-built or a modular, and that would be the residential code, the plumbing code, same requirements, electrical code, same requirements, and the same requirements with the energy code for insulation and windows. So those are the 4 primary codes that will apply. But wheels does not fall under our state program.
I'll add a question. I guess also too, to kind of go off on what your question was. So they're considered recreational vehicles. Let's dream, let's imagine what we have displayed outside. Is there any way to use these besides them only being seen as recreational vehicles? I mean, help me understand and help us understand, because the question is, yes, these are well-built, crafted products and homes, but cities don't like them because they're still on wheels. I know and not that I'm comparing it to the food truck movement, but food trucks had a bad rap for a while. So how do we make these seem more like a better option for something? And what could cities use these for? Anyone want to touch that?
I'll say briefly, you see, zoning is a local matter, and zoning is going to be up to each community and what they decide. If somebody in a local community wants to decide they want to allow those on wheels to be mixed in with stick-built and modular, that's their choice, but I don't think we've seen that anywhere that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what needs to happen is you need to find a neighborhood that's supportive of this, that will be, a model for the rest of the city. Because again, it's not a matter of the technical aspects of this. It's a matter of the community support and understanding and appreciation. So to find a model site or a model neighborhood that we could certainly craft a code for, but that we can get some community support. People can see it, understand that it works, that it has value, and perhaps extend that then further to a larger part of the city or other neighborhood.
I agree. I think it's what we've said before, you have to get buy-in from neighborhoods because there is a concern. We're looking at tiny houses as permanent neighborhood, permanent housing options. So we really haven't thought about the idea of a project where they're still on wheels, but it's something I think we could certainly talk about and then figure out what are the issues, what are the health and safety issues that we have concerns about, and what could we do to make it possible, and then find a piece of property. For me, I'm looking at it also from a different point of view, because affordable retail is another issue that we have in the city of Decatur. And having these types of smaller structures on wheels that we could roll into underutilized surface parking lots in downtown Decatur, that we could then rent out at an affordable rate for somebody who wanted to test a retail shop, or a tiny office, or an artist studio. That kind of thing is something else we're looking at also. But that would be temporary, where we would move them around.
So the power is in your hands, ladies and gentlemen. That's what that was.
All right, we're going to do 2 more questions, and then we will have a final say from the panel, and then move on to the next session. It's all you, sir.
Hi, thank you very much for coming today. There actually is a HUD-funded tiny home under their home entitlement program called the Elder Cottage. Are any of you familiar with that? It's possible that Columbus, Georgia has that in their program, but technically what it allows is for a senior citizen who owns a home to place a 400 square foot or less mobile home, basically, in their backyard that's accessible to live in, and I suppose rent out the primary house. I'm sorry the resilient program isn't here, because this all is related to resilient housing and the need to mitigate housing market shortage.
Aware of that, but I'm going to find out on Monday, because that's exactly what we're talking about. We have a lot of lower income elderly residents who want to stay in their neighborhood, but their house needs a lot of work. And the idea that we've been kicking around is being able to build a small house in the back that they can move into, that was completely energy efficient and accessible, and then they rent out the big house to get income. So that's interesting. We'll find out about it.
So this will be our last question. Coming back to you.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for the concept. I actually thought about this 6 years ago. I'm interested in veteran housing. Our veteran population. Is the city talking anything about communities for veterans when it comes to tiny homes?
Almost there.
Not when it comes to tiny homes. The city actually is just starting a new housing initiative, really focused entirely on veterans, but the tiny house aspect of it is not part of the conversation currently, and it needs to be. You're right. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining us. This is very good timing. Would you like to wrap it up with a comment?
So I've learned today that there is no Ebster Gym at Ponce City Market. So I am very, very sorry. I went to the wrong place. And parking is really bad. Can we work on that? Yes, no, I should have taken Uber or something, or Lyft. Anyway, good morning, Stephanie Stuckey. I am Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Atlanta. I am so sorry I missed the discussion, but Tim Keene has well represented the city, I have no doubt. But I'm happy to talk just very briefly. We have been selected, City of Atlanta is one of 100 cities selected globally by the Rockefeller Foundation to be part of what they call the 100 Resilient Cities Network. And what that is helping cities really be innovative incubators for change, and how we're dealing with rapid population, and the fact by 2050, 70% of the world's population is going to be clustered in urban cores. And then you layer that with the impacts of climate change, and we're really having to grapple with a lot of shocks and stresses over the next several decades. And that fits really nicely with the work that Tim Keene and his team are doing with their design studio and how we plan for the future. And what's amazing to me is over 50% of the infrastructure that we're going to need in cities to adapt with the rapid surge in population has not been built yet. So what that looks like is really important, and how communities can be involved in creating the future of their city and empower themselves is something that I feel strongly about. I know that Tim Keene feels strongly about. I want the citizens to really be more engaged in that process. I think micro-housing, tiny houses, however you want to phrase it, making crates into homes, that is a critical part of the future of the city of Atlanta and cities globally. The cool thing about the Rockefeller Network is it spans 46 countries and 6 continents. So we're working with Singapore and London and Byblos and interacting with them on how they're dealing with micro-housing, and so we can share best practices. And I think it fits so nicely in with affordability. Living in a smaller space really helps us afford to live in increasingly expensive urban centers. And then the last comment I'll make, certainly my office still oversees all environmental and sustainability initiatives for the city. So reducing our footprint and living in a smaller home really helps the environment. We use less energy, we produce less waste, we consume less because we're in a smaller environment. I recently downsized. I am in a much smaller home. I am in the city of Atlanta limits. And it's amazing, it really makes you think. If you don't have a lot of space, you just consume less. And I love the way that smaller environment changes your entire mindset. So that, I will continue the conversation, and just my sincere apologies for being in the wrong place.
Now that Steph's here, yes. Stephanie Stuckey.
I have cards.
She has cards.
Thank you.
So we talked about tiny houses and uses for metropolitan cities. Are there any other? I mean, you know, where I've gone in my thoughts of, and Lynn, you touched on this. There's more ideas to this. There's more than just a tiny home. But so these tiny spaces are. What else could we use them for? I mean, you said. Obviously, you know, and I give a shout out to you for the office again. The Resilient Atlanta helped build our office, so please tour it. But what else could we? What else am I missing, or what else are we missing about this movement? Have you had thoughts about what else we could be focusing on? And Tim, I agree. I don't think it's a movement. It's here. But I also say it's still in its infancy. Yes, it's on TV. Everyone's like, yeah, tiny houses are everywhere. No, they're not. They're not. We're still at the beginning of this. We're still at the very, very beginning of this. But we've made such great headway, just like working with Ted and his group to pass that state appendix. So people can, so now we just need to talk to the cities and say, please adopt this. And that's where you come in. So I'm getting off topic. All right, I'm gonna throw it back to you guys. I don't even remember what I asked now. You're good? Everyone did their darn part. Stephanie, do you want to add anything else?
I think one thing that fits, again, in with what Tim's working on is, as we decrease our living space, how can we increase community space and public space where people can come together? So I know at my home, the largest party I can have comfortably probably is about 20 people. Well, what if I want to have 50 people? So how can cities be part of making sure that folks who choose to live deliberately in smaller environments also have access to space where they can come together and interact with community? So I think connected very much with smaller individual living spaces is increasing public community space. So we still have that opportunity to really interact with one another.
Actually, I want to ask one more question, and then we're done.
You're changing the rules here.
Yeah. My share.
And Stephanie's right on. I wish I'd said that. But we're actually, this gets back to the Santa Fe case where you got this old hotel with all the surface parking. And in addition to the competition being around creating a beautiful living environment and a small space for people. Also, one of the criteria around winners will be what's the public realm you create. You know, we got these surface parking lots. Now, what's the public space look like that these people are sharing beyond the small spaces that they're living in?
With our cottage court, it is outdoor space, but we made sure that we included community gardens. We have gathering space for parties. We have the shared green space, and we're working on the concept of a project with a private home here in the city on a very large piece of land, and the idea of how we might be able to do a cottage court development on it and then use the older home that could be not only a residential space, but that it would also be shared community space. If you had friends in from out of town, it would be a room that you could make available to them or for a party. So we're thinking in that direction, and I think Stephanie's right. It's something that has to be part of the equation.
So again, from the state perspective, January 1, 2018 is the date for the appendix and the code amendment to go into effect. We have one more meeting. If you want to see government in action, November 15th with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. You can come there and show support to the state officials that you support the tiny house movement, and then maybe some of these other things that you're talking about can take some initiative and move forward.
So, I guess, Tim, you're right, I lied. You kind of hit, Stephanie and you talked about I talk about thinking beyond the walls, and we need to get back to community. We are so good at Netflixing and chilling and not talking to our neighbor and not being able to ask for that cup of sugar. Like, I just recently moved to Inman Park. Now I know all my neighbors. It was an amazing transformation from my previous neighborhood. Like, the next day I moved in, I already knew 4 neighbors. So it's getting back to that idea, and no matter what space you live in, but I think micro-living can be an aid in intentional communities, because we're looking for this. Happiness are people and experiences. And when you take those things away, you're not happy. And the fact that we love to have everything in our homes now, so we don't need to interact with the outside world. America is one of the most depressed countries in the world, but yet we have everything. So I'm going to end on that and let you folks say your final tiny house movement, micro-living hurrahs, and then and they'll be here for if anyone wants to meet them. And but thank you so much for coming. So Stephanie, any closing remarks?
I really don't. I think happiness equals experiences and people is something I'm going to take with me. I'll tweet that out later.
I would just say we have become so enamored with regulations that I would like for you to leave here thinking about that, in the sense that most of what was built in this country that we love was created before zoning existed. And since then, we've built the places that we tend to complain about. And that's not a coincidence. And every moment that we can back off on some regulation and let people be people will be helpful. I mean, it's towards your point about, community here. Stop regulating each other so much.
Yeah, I totally agree. Remember what I said about our yes if philosophy, and if you ask anybody that works with me, you know that my favorite question is why not? I think we do need to step back and say, why are we telling people you can't do that? Let's stop and think about whether or not the idea is a good one, and how do we make it happen?
So the last thing is, what we did in the state was a public-private partnership. There's the private, and we are the government, so we did work something out. So government does work sometimes.
All right, folks, we'll go towards some more tinies. Enjoy the rest of your day. The next session here is at 1:30 with Bonnie Casamasima about space.